In the early hours of June 6, 1944, darkness still blankets the Norman countryside near the small French village of Sainte-Mère-Église. A cool wind moves across flooded fields and ancient hedgerows, carrying the distant rumble of engines growing steadily louder. Below, German sentries peer into the night, hearing aircraft but unable to judge their numbers. Above them, hundreds of transport planes emerge from the darkness in long, disciplined formations. Their silhouettes are barely visible against a sky broken by drifting cloud. Red and green signal lights begin to flash inside the aircraft. Men rise from narrow canvas seats, checking reserve parachutes, tightening chin straps and gripping weapons wrapped against their chests. Faces that moments before showed quiet conversation now reveal determined concentration. Every soldier knows the next few minutes may decide not only his own fate, but the success of the greatest amphibious invasion in history. The men belong largely to the 101st Airborne Division of the United States Army. Their mission appears straightforward on carefully prepared maps. They are to land behind Utah Beach, seize key causeways leading inland, destroy German positions, secure bridges, and prevent enemy reinforcements from reaching the coast before Allied troops arrive at dawn. Months of planning have reduced every objective to colored symbols and numbered drop zones. Yet war rarely follows a map. As anti-aircraft fire erupts beneath the approaching aircraft, carefully rehearsed formations begin to unravel. Tracer rounds climb into the darkness like glowing threads. Pilots take violent, evasive action. Some accelerate, others climb unexpectedly, while navigators struggle to recognize landmarks almost invisible beneath blackout conditions. The green light appears. One after another, paratroopers disappear into the darkness. Instead of descending neatly onto their assigned drop zones, many drift into marshes, orchards, and isolated fields scattered across dozens of kilometers. Some aircraft release their men far too early, others overshoot entirely. Equipment bundles vanish into flooded ground. Radios are lost. Officers become separated from their companies within seconds of landing. Records suggest that only a small proportion of the division reaches its designated landing areas during those chaotic opening moments. To the men falling through darkness, there is no way of knowing whether they are meters or miles from where they were supposed to be. At first glance, everything seems to have gone disastrously wrong. Yet history would reveal a far more remarkable story. Those scattered landings, born from confusion rather than design, would force countless small groups of soldiers to improvise with extraordinary initiative. In doing so, they would create uncertainty among German commanders, disrupt defensive plans, and contribute to the success of the landings on Utah Beach in ways few could have predicted before sunrise. The Allied invasion of Normandy represented the culmination of years of planning, industrial effort, and international cooperation. By the spring of 1944, Britain had become a vast military staging ground. Hundreds of thousands of American, British, Canadian, and Allied personnel crowded airfields, ports, and camps stretching across southern England. Every vehicle, landing craft, aircraft, and crate of ammunition had to arrive at precisely the right place at precisely the right time. Even the weather became a decisive factor. Commanders waited anxiously for conditions suitable enough to launch the largest seaborne invasion ever attempted. For more incredible true stories from World War II, carefully researched and brought to life, subscribe to the channel and never miss a new documentary. For more incredible true stories from World War II, carefully researched and brought to life, subscribe to the channel and never miss a new documentary. The westernmost landing area, known as Utah Beach, appeared less formidable than other invasion sectors, yet its geography posed unique dangers. Much of the surrounding countryside had been deliberately flooded by German forces. Low-lying fields became shallow lakes, crossed by only a handful of raised roads and causeways. These narrow routes offered the only practical exits for troops and vehicles landing on the beach. If German defenders retained control of them, thousands of soldiers could become trapped between rising tides and enemy fire. Responsibility for securing these vital approaches fell largely upon the 101st Airborne Division. Formed in 1942, the division had trained intensively in airborne warfare, mastering parachute assaults designed to place infantry deep behind enemy lines before conventional forces arrived. The concept promised enormous advantages. Airborne troops could seize bridges, disrupt communications, and create confusion where the enemy least expected attack. Yet the method carried equally enormous risks. Unlike infantry advancing together across open ground, paratroopers accepted that they might become isolated immediately upon landing. Success depended upon initiative, discipline, and the ability of small groups to continue fighting even after losing contact with higher command. Months before D-Day, intelligence officers studied aerial photographs, French resistance reports, and captured German documents to identify objectives. Engineers prepared detailed models of Norman villages. Soldiers rehearsed assaults using full-scale mock-ups of crossroads and bridges. Every platoon memorized alternative routes. Every commander learned secondary objectives should communications fail. Even so, planners understood that airborne operations relied upon accurate navigation under darkness, often at low altitude and under enemy fire. Tiny errors made in the air could produce enormous consequences on the ground. The force assigned to deliver the airborne divisions reflected the immense scale of the undertaking. Hundreds of C-47 Skytrain transport aircraft would carry thousands of American paratroopers across the English Channel in carefully timed serials. Gliders carrying additional troops, artillery, and vehicles would follow later. Pathfinder teams equipped with radar beacons and signal lamps were intended to mark the correct drop zones before the main formations arrived. On paper, the system appeared highly organized. In practice, almost every element depended upon favorable weather, reliable navigation, and formations remaining intact despite darkness and hostile fire. Nature quickly challenged those assumptions. Thick cloud banks drifted across parts of the channel during the approach. Pilots were forced to alter altitude and course. Some formations became separated. Visibility deteriorated just as navigators searched for rivers, roads, and villages that looked remarkably similar from above at night. According to wartime reports, several Pathfinder teams themselves landed off target or encountered difficulties establishing their navigation aids. Without those guiding signals, later aircraft found accurate identification increasingly difficult. German anti-aircraft batteries added another layer of chaos. Although Allied planners had expected resistance, the intensity varied considerably along different routes. Pilots suddenly confronted exploding shells, streams of tracer ammunition, and the fear of collision as aircraft maneuvered independently. Some crews maintained remarkable discipline despite the danger. Others instinctively broke formation to avoid incoming fire. Those brief moments of evasive action were often enough to shift the release point by hundreds or even thousands of meters. Inside each aircraft, the paratroopers could sense little of the wider picture. The engines drowned conversation. Red warning lights illuminated rows of heavily equipped men carrying rifles, ammunition, grenades, rations, and medical supplies weighing well over 30 kilograms in many cases. Static lines hooked onto overhead cables. Reserve parachutes pressed tightly against their chests, restricting movement inside the crowded fuselage. Every jump had been rehearsed countless times, yet no amount of training could remove the uncertainty of combat. When the jump signal finally came, hesitation vanished. Men stepped into darkness one after another, disappearing into violent winds, scattered gunfire, and an unfamiliar landscape below. Some landed safely in open fields. Others descended into flooded marshes where equipment dragged them beneath the water. Historians estimate that a number of paratroopers drowned before ever firing a shot, burdened by the very equipment intended to help them accomplish their mission. Elsewhere, isolated soldiers gathered whatever comrades they could find, often from entirely different units, and began moving towards the distant sounds of battle. Before dawn had fully broken, The carefully organized airborne assault existed largely as dozens of independent groups scattered across Normandy. Radios were missing, maps had been lost, officers and enlisted men fought side by side regardless of their original assignments, and many objectives remained uncertain. From the perspective of those on the ground, the operation appeared dangerously close to failure. Yet amid the confusion, something unexpected was already beginning to emerge, an adaptability that no planning staff could have designed, and a chain of events in which one wrong turn after another would steadily reshape the battle for Normandy itself. Daylight gradually reveals the true scale of the dispersal. Instead of a single, concentrated airborne force, the countryside is dotted with isolated clusters of paratroopers navigating by compass, memory, and instinct. Church towers rise above the hedgerows, while narrow lanes twist between orchards and ancient stone farmhouses. Smoke hangs in the cool morning air, broken only by the crack of rifles and the distant thunder of naval guns firing from the channel. Many soldiers have no clear idea where they are, yet almost every group understands one simple instruction: keep moving towards the objectives and engage the enemy whenever the opportunity presents itself. Among the officers searching for order is Major General Maxwell D. Taylor, commander of the 101st Airborne Division. Having landed with only a handful of men, Taylor spends the early hours gathering scattered paratroopers into improvised fighting groups. His experience reflects that of countless commanders across Normandy. Carefully organized companies no longer exist in their planned formations. Sergeants command mixed platoons. Privates find themselves defending crossroads beside officers they have never met. Training now proves more valuable than strict adherence to the original plan. Every soldier has been taught the broader mission, allowing even tiny groups to continue fighting without waiting for orders. Perhaps the most remarkable consequence of the scattered landings is the confusion they create among the German defenders. Instead of confronting one concentrated airborne assault, German commanders receive reports of American paratroopers appearing almost everywhere at once. According to wartime reports, telephone lines are repeatedly cut, road junctions come under sudden attack, and isolated garrisons encounter enemy troops where none had been expected. Exact numbers remain uncertain, but the fragmented nature of the landings makes it extraordinarily difficult for the defenders to judge the size or direction of the invasion. In several areas, German officers assume they are facing much larger forces than are actually present. Small groups of paratroopers begin accomplishing objectives that seem impossible given their limited numbers. Bridges are secured before demolition charges can be prepared. Machine gun nests overlooking vital routes are attacked from unexpected directions. Demolition teams destroy sections of communication infrastructure, delaying German attempts to organize coordinated counterattacks. In many cases, these actions are undertaken by men who have become separated from their original units and are acting on their own initiative rather than under direct command. One of the division's most significant objectives lies around the causeways leading inland from Utah Beach. These raised roads cross flooded terrain that effectively channels movement through a handful of narrow exits. If German forces retain control of these routes, troops landing from the sea could become trapped on the beaches under artillery fire. Throughout the morning, scattered airborne groups gradually converge upon these approaches, clearing enemy positions through a series of local engagements. None of these actions alone determines the outcome of D-Day, but together, they steadily weaken the German defensive network at precisely the moment Allied forces are coming ashore. Meanwhile, the invasion unfolds on Utah Beach itself. Shortly after dawn, assault troops of the 4th Infantry Division begin landing. Strong currents and navigational factors bring many units ashore approximately 1,800 meters south of their intended landing sector. In another operation, this might have proved disastrous. Instead, Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., the assistant division commander, quickly assesses the situation and decides to continue the assault from the unexpected location rather than attempting a dangerous redeployment under fire. His decision becomes one of the defining moments of the Normandy landings. The success of that decision is closely connected to the efforts of the airborne troops inland. As infantry push off the beaches, they encounter many of the causeways already contested or secured by paratroopers who had landed hours earlier. Although fighting continues throughout the day, the feared German counterattack against Utah Beach never develops with the speed or coordination anticipated before the invasion. Historians generally agree that the airborne operations contributed significantly to this outcome, though they continue to debate the precise weight of each individual action within the much larger campaign. Not every objective is achieved as planned. Some bridges remain in German hands longer than expected. Several drop zones cannot be secured on schedule. Casualties mount steadily as isolated groups encounter prepared defensive positions. Communications remain unreliable for much of the day, complicating efforts to coordinate artillery, reinforcements, and medical evacuation. According to official after-action reports, confusion persists well into June 7th before many units fully re-establish their command structures. Yet the very disorder that initially appears catastrophic continues to work against the defenders. German commanders struggle to distinguish between deliberate airborne tactics and accidental dispersal. Reports arrive from villages many kilometers apart describing American soldiers moving through fields, occupying crossroads, and attacking isolated strongpoints. Without a clear picture, valuable time is lost deciding where reserves should be committed. Some formations remain in place defending areas that are never seriously threatened, while others move cautiously through terrain where scattered paratroopers stage sudden ambushes before disappearing once more into the hedgerows. The Norman countryside itself amplifies this uncertainty. Dense bocage hedges, some centuries old, divide fields into countless enclosed compartments, bordered by earth banks and thick vegetation. Visibility is often limited to only a few dozen meters. A handful of determined soldiers can delay much larger forces simply by exploiting the terrain. The paratroopers, forced to operate independently from the moment they land, adapt quickly to this environment. Instead of seeking large engagements, they strike vulnerable points, withdraw, regroup, and continue towards their objectives by whatever routes remain open. If you're enjoying this journey through history, subscribing genuinely helps us continue bringing remarkable true stories like this to the channel. The airborne operation in Normandy also illustrates how different nations approach the challenge of inserting troops behind enemy lines during the Second World War. Britain's 6th Airborne Division, landing east of the River Orne on the same night, achieved greater concentration around several key objectives, including the famous capture of Pegasus Bridge. Their success owed much to the extraordinary precision of glider landings, which delivered assault troops almost directly beside their targets. American doctrine, by contrast, relied more heavily on large-scale parachute drops, covering wider areas. This provided greater operational flexibility, but also increased the risk of dispersal under adverse conditions. German airborne forces, the Fallschirmjäger, had demonstrated remarkable effectiveness earlier in the war during operations in the Low Countries and on Crete. However, the heavy casualties suffered during the invasion of Crete in 1941 persuaded the German High Command to reduce large-scale parachute assaults thereafter. By 1944, many Fallschirmjäger units fought primarily as elite ground infantry rather than conducting major airborne operations. Soviet airborne formations expanded considerably during the war, but were more often employed in conventional combat because of logistical and operational constraints. Measured purely by navigational accuracy, the 101st Airborne's drop on D-Day could hardly be described as ideal. Yet measured by operational effect, the results were striking. The scattered landings disrupted communications, delayed German reactions, secured critical approaches, and supported the successful establishment of the Utah Beach bridgehead. What began as a series of wrong turns was gradually revealing itself as one of the most extraordinary examples of battlefield adaptability in modern military history. As the fighting continues beyond the first day, the scattered companies of the 101st Airborne Division gradually begin to reconnect. Officers compare hastily drawn maps with landmarks identified during combat. Messengers move cautiously along hedgerow lanes carrying handwritten orders where radios have failed. Medical teams establish aid stations inside farmhouses, churches, and barns, treating wounded men under constant threat of artillery fire. The sounds of battle remain unrelenting. Naval guns continue to bombard inland positions, while Allied aircraft pass overhead in growing numbers. What had begun as dozens of isolated actions slowly develops into a coherent front stretching across the Cotentin Peninsula. The immediate impact of the airborne operation extends far beyond the villages where the paratroopers first landed. By helping to secure the exits from Utah Beach, they allow increasing numbers of troops, vehicles, and supplies to move inland. Engineers repair roads, clear mines, and strengthen bridges, transforming fragile footholds into dependable supply routes. Within days, thousands of additional soldiers pour through terrain that might otherwise have remained under German control. Historians generally agree that the success of Utah Beach cannot be attributed to any single formation. Naval gunfire, airborne assaults, infantry landings, deception operations, and German command decisions all played significant roles. Yet the contribution of the scattered paratroopers remains one of the most remarkable examples of how determination and initiative can compensate for operational chaos. The experience also influences military thinking long after the guns fall silent. Allied commanders study the lessons of Normandy in extraordinary detail. They conclude that airborne forces require better navigation, improved radio equipment, and more reliable methods of identifying drop zones under difficult conditions. These findings shape later operations during the war, including Operation Market Garden in September 1944, although that ambitious campaign would reveal a different set of challenges and remind planners that even improved airborne doctrine could not eliminate the uncertainty of combat. After the war, advances in radar, satellite navigation, and precision aircraft systems reduce many of the problems encountered over Normandy, but military academies continue to examine D-Day as a classic demonstration that no technology can entirely replace initiative on the battlefield. The legacy of the 101st Airborne Division survives not only in official histories, but also in the landscapes where those men fought. Visitors to Normandy today can walk along many of the same narrow causeways, stand beside the flooded lowlands that once threatened to trap an invasion force, and visit museums preserving uniforms, weapons, and personal equipment recovered from the battlefield. At the Airborne Museum, artifacts and archival records help explain the complexity of the airborne landings. Nearby cemeteries, memorials, and preserved aircraft serve as quiet reminders that behind every operational map stood individual lives marked forever by a single night of extraordinary uncertainty. Exact casualty figures vary slightly between historical sources, reflecting the complexity of the campaign, but there is no dispute that the cost was considerable. Looking back, it becomes clear that the opening moments over Normandy represented far more than a navigational error. They revealed the unpredictable nature of war itself. Military planners had invested years calculating routes, timings, and objectives with remarkable precision, yet within minutes of crossing the French coast, wind, weather, darkness, and enemy fire had altered the operation beyond recognition. On paper, such disruption should have produced disaster. Instead, it exposed another quality that cannot easily be measured in operational orders: the ability of ordinary soldiers to think independently when every original assumption has collapsed. The scattered paratroopers did not know they were becoming part of one of history's most studied military operations. They could not see the wider battlefield. They did not know that thousands of landing craft were approaching the beaches, or that commanders across Europe were anxiously awaiting reports from Normandy. Most could see only the next hedgerow, the next crossroads, the next farmhouse, and the comrades standing beside them. Their world had narrowed to immediate decisions made under immense pressure, often with incomplete information and no certainty of survival. Some groups never found the units with which they had trained for years. Others fought alongside strangers whose names they learned only after the battle, if at all. Equipment intended for carefully organized assaults was abandoned in flooded fields. Officers commanded men from different regiments. Improvisation replaced rigid planning. Records suggest that many objectives were achieved by mixed groups, assembled entirely by circumstance rather than design. Historians continue to debate exactly how much the widespread dispersal contributed to German confusion compared with other factors, but few dispute that the adaptability shown by the airborne troops became one of the defining characteristics of the Normandy campaign. As dawn had broken on June 6, 1944, the scattered lights beneath descending parachutes appeared to signal confusion, isolation, and failure. From the ground, each wrong turn seemed another step away from the carefully prepared invasion plan, yet as the hours unfolded, those same wrong turns placed determined soldiers at unexpected crossroads, behind unsuspecting defenses and across vital lines of communication. What had looked like disorder became opportunity. What had seemed a crippling mistake became a source of tactical uncertainty for the enemy. Today, the fields of Normandy are peaceful once again. The flooded marshes have returned to quiet farmland. Birds cross skies once filled with transport aircraft, and visitors travel roads that were once fought over meter by meter. Time has softened the scars on the landscape, but it has not erased the significance of that extraordinary night. Every preserved parachute, every weathered helmet, and every carefully maintained memorial reminds us that history is not always shaped by perfect plans. Sometimes it is shaped by the courage to continue when those plans fall apart. The men of the 101st Airborne Division did not set out to make history by landing in the wrong places. They set out to complete a mission under conditions few could fully control. Their scattered arrival across Normandy was not a triumph of navigation. Every weathered helmet and every carefully maintained memorial reminds us that history is not always shaped by perfect plans. Sometimes it is shaped by the courage to continue when those plans fall apart. The men of the 101st Airborne Division did not set out to make history by landing in the wrong places. They set out to complete a mission under conditions few could fully control. Their scattered arrival across Normandy was not a triumph of navigation, but it became a triumph of resilience, discipline, and initiative. It demonstrated that the strength of an army lies not only in its plans, but in the people entrusted to carry them out when circumstances change without warning. And in the darkness before dawn, when one wrong turn seemed to threaten everything the Allies had prepared, it instead helped write one of the most remarkable chapters of the liberation of Europe, a lasting reminder that history is sometimes changed, not by perfection, but by the extraordinary courage to adapt.